Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Crystal Earth podcast. My name is Monet Noctaris, also known as the Black Rose of Gaia, and I'm your host. We're here to talk about what's going on in the planetary field, both in real time and within like a greater historical context, as well as how you might be feeling it in your own body and your own life and what we're moving towards after this shift runs through the next part of the sequence. So today, that's kind of exactly what I wanted to talk about, is to kind of get into the nitty gritty of what exactly the old grid was and now what the new grid is moving into. I gave like a snapshot of this in the first episode, but I want to give you a taste of kind of like why this actually matters and tangibly how it can impact your life, your relationships, and the future of what the earth can and will become now that the operating system has become rebooted. It's not broadcasting at full capacity yet. Like I said before, like this is a sequence. It's not going to be overnight. It may look worse before it looks better, but it is in process. And the hardest part, we've moved past that. Now we are moving into, we'll call it like the stabilization and broadcast phase of the crystalline override. That is restoring Gaia's original blueprint for original crystalline song before it was tampered with, distorted, fractured in other planetary cycles. So let's break down what the old grid used to enforce. What were the old parameters? What's the old grid logic that was fractured? There's a whole backstory on why it was fractured and when. I'm trying to decide if I want to do a podcast episode about that specifically on its own, because really, there's a really big, long backstory there, which really flows into the whole arc of galactic history. If you really want to do deep dive on that, you can go to my old podcast, the Starseed Awakening podcast. That podcast is a little more galactic. So if that's not your realm, no worries. Here I'm trying to kind of translate this into real-time human terms. So what we'll say for now, which I mentioned previously, is it's kind of like the grid system. If you think of it like a computer operating system that runs through Gaia's crystalline body, right? All of the facets of her physical crystalline body and her consciousness, the rivers, the aquifers, the oceans, the ice, her volcanoes, her mountain ranges, her trees. Gaia is living and present and conscious everywhere as this Earth's planetary consciousness. She holds the operating system as kind of like her nervous system. That's what the grid is. And so you can kind of think of it as it was maybe corrupted by malware for about 13,000 years. That's when the big fracture happened, right at the end of the last galactic cycle. And that coincided directly with the fall of a lot of the ancient Earth civilizations, such as Atlantis and Lemuria. Yes, these places were real. Yes, I have receipts. Go to my old podcast for that. One of my special interests as a neurospicy person is in galactic history. So if I get too deep into that here, I'll never finish this podcast. So all you need to know for this moment is that Earth's grid was fractured intentionally, unfortunately, which allowed kind of new codes to be inserted into it. And these fragmentation codes, they entrained the whole species and the planetary body into a few different things that have been reinforced over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Some of the main ones are survival, right? I think I've mentioned this before, where humans' primary directive is survive first, feel later. Everything is secondary to survival. And so everybody just unconsciously tunes to survival, even if you know you are safe, right? Like I might be sitting in my house. I know there's no saber-toothed tiger outside of my window or something, right? Like, I know that I am safe in here, but I still might be feeling anxiety. And that's because my nervous system has been entrained to expect to have to survive in every single situation in my life. That's one of the reasons why humans struggle with their mental health a lot. And we have to teach ourselves to override these survival responses if we want to ever step into anything beyond scarcity, right? If we want to step into choice, consent, abundance. So that parameter is going to be shifting. However, humans are still catching up right now. The old survival patterning is not being enforced anymore, but we're not there yet. All of our survival patterns and distortions have to come to the surface first so that they can be cleared. So that when balance is able to be enforced, a bulk of what we've already lived through has come up to the surface to be cleared. Not everybody will allow that, but if you do allow it, you're going to be in better shape. Another one of the old parameters was extraction manipulation. This shows up everywhere. It shows up in anywhere from commerce to the workplace to personal relationships. And it's directly fueled by that survival instinct that has been ingrained in all of us since the distortions entered the grid. Another really big one that's important to name is imbalance in the masculine polarity. So for the past 13,000 years, we've been living with war, violence, suppression of the feminine, often in very, very tangible, overt ways. There are still countries where a woman's right to education is not the standard. This is because for so long, the distortions in the grid have been enforcing an imbalance in the masculine polarity. These are things that we've normalized, right? Like, even though we've come a long way with this, like, women used to not be allowed to vote just about 100 years ago, right? We were still earning that right in the United States, at least. Now it's like the balance is starting to even out, which will especially happen after the equinox, which is when the masculine and the feminine really reach more of a balance point. And that's the equinox of this year, 2025. But it's like we're still seeing the masculine distortions trying to gain the foothold back, right? And that's kind of like a normal part in the planetary tipping process right now, which is that those who are still benefiting from and clinging to distortion, like distorted masculine principles of domination, violence, control over the feminine, are going to be digging their heels in further to try to make sure that balance does not become achievable. Even though balance is not dictated by humans, it will be dictated by the grid itself. So just expect that and know that because of the changes in the grid, it will sort itself out because people will just stop buying in to the distorted frameworks because they will be entrained towards coherence, which is the frequency of truth and which is what the new grid supports. More on that in a little bit. Another old grid distortion, which is an interesting one. This was a surprise to me during the whole override process. Part of the process of the override was removing and replacing some of the old synthetic overlays that were left in place when Earth went into quarantine after the big fracture happened. So from the galactic perspective, Earth was kind of like the problem child and was just placed over here. Go sit in the corner by the greater governing structures out in the galaxy, which I want to say that I am not affiliated with. My primary goal and directive has been to free Earth from the greater governing structures and principles that kind of got us here in the first place. That's a topic for another day. Bottom line, Earth should be free. And Earth is free now. So, long story. Check out my old podcast if you want to know more about that. But one of the old kind of synthetic overlays that I helped dismantle is something called the karmic overlay. So karma, you've heard of karma. This was actually an old grid parameter, a synthetic one that was put into place when Earth went into quarantine. Quarantine means it's kind of like no contact. Earth goes no contact from the rest of the greater galactic community. So karma was put into place as a system to help incentivize humans to be able to grow and evolve from lifetime over lifetime. But while it had a good intention, it created a lot of problems. It created delayed opportunities for evolution, right? If you incarnated here and you entangled with someone, say you had a relationship with them, and say they harmed you, for example, and then say that they didn't redeem themselves according to karmic law, they would have been contractually obligated to incarnate with you again in the next lifetime. So then you're stuck with that person again so that they can learn the lesson. That's not fair. That's not consent based. Earth is now sovereignty and consent based, meaning that you shouldn't have to incarnate with your abusive ex husband just so that he can have a second chance to grow. That's not cool. I don't like that. So it's done. What it has been replaced with is something called a ledger. And this is built into the grid. And what it does is if someone acts out of distortion, then it kind of gives them an immediate reflection of that distortion so that in real time, they get to make a different choice. They feel it. And the more they turn away from it and ignore it and choose to continue living in distortion, it's just going to feel worse and worse for them. Right? That's just consequence. There's no lifetime to lifetime entanglement. So that's a really positive thing that is already in place. That's already done. One of the other big primary distortions in the planetary field was around union. It's easy to think of it in like a romantic sense, but also applies to any sort of relationship. It could be a friendship, family members. It could even be like two communities, even just groups of people. But union referring to how people relate to each other. And the old parameters in the grid that were distorted was union based on sacrifice, union based on dependency, martyrdom, where there's usually some sort of imbalance happening. Somebody has to sacrifice themselves for the other person to stay around. Also, dependency of merging, right? It's like two become one, right? It's like fields, energy systems merge and become dependent on each other. Now, the new model, which we're calling sovereign union, is where two people are both whole first. They don't depend on each other for their emotional well-being. They are already whole. So union becomes amplification and it becomes consent based. So it's like, I choose to have this person in my life because they add to my life, not I need this person in my life because what will I do if they're gone? I listen to the radio in the car when I'm driving around, and there's this radio station that plays throwback jams. And, it's a lot of like R&B songs and hip hop from like the 90s and early 2000s. And it's like every single song, it's just funny having this perspective. It's like every single song is about like, baby, come back. Like, what am I going to do without your love? I need a girl. It's like all this like based on like need and hunger. And that's really the perfect demonstration of what union has historically been on this planet since the grid fractured. It's just all built on sacrifice and dependency. So that's why I don't know if you've ever noticed how hard it can feel to leave a relationship, even when you know it's not the right one for you and you know that you're sacrificing yourself or your well-being. It's because your nervous system isn't trained with the old grid, because of course it is, right? So it's saying, I need this person in order to be whole, even if you're not consciously thinking that. But what's new now that will be mostly, I'm going to say this is probably going to be enforced after the solstice. You'll feel this more. The winter solstice coming up is wholeness first. And then, if someone wants to be in my life, I welcome that. If they add to my life, if they amplify my life and my own happiness, and it won't feel like, now it's hard to kind of like override that and to break the pattern, but it will feel more natural and easy to do so once those sovereign union codes are being broadcast. So once the equinox happens, which this is going to be released on the equinox, this will have already happened, balance of polarity is going to be enforced in the grid. So this is kind of like, when I mentioned the imbalance in the masculine polarity, this is a direct example of this. That will become balanced. Feminine, masculine, solar, lunar, right? All these kind of like polarities will become equalized in the grid and reinforced. So that's a really positive one as well. And so it's like the energetic infrastructure will receive its update as of the equinox. You still may not feel balanced yet if you're still holding on to a lot of dynamics in your life that are really polarized. I've talked a lot about the old grid parameters. I mean, there's more. I could keep going into them. These are the big ones. All of that fits into what we refer to as distortion. It's a collapsing of truth. What it becomes replaced with is reinforcing within the grid coherence, which is, I guess I should talk about coherence because this is something that I talk about a lot, but it's kind of hard to explain in an intellectual way. It's something that you feel. So, what coherence feels like in your body is like you don't need to collapse your truth for others. You know who you are. You know what it feels like in your body to live from a place of honesty within yourself and integrity within yourself, and your values and your actions are all aligned. You don't lie to yourself or others just to keep the peace. And that feels effortless. So right now, living in coherence feels a little bit like swimming upstream. But once we reach the winter solstice, coherence is going to kind of become the baseline that is broadcast out throughout the grid. And that will make living in coherence feel easier because truth and coherence feels safe at that point in your nervous system because you're syncing with Gaia's nervous system where coherence is the baseline. And distortion feels unsafe. It feels harder and harder to lie to yourself about the things in your life that aren't working, whether that be your job, whether that be your relationships, whether that be any sort of situation that you are just tolerating. It will get harder to bypass how you're feeling, spiritual bypassing included, and it will get easier to live in alignment with yourself and what you know to be true. It won't feel like you're going to die because that's the old survival encoding that is no longer being enforced planet-wide. So we've talked a bit about what this looks like in like a relational and personal setting, but just as importantly, this will be affecting the entire species and what we're able to become as a human species, a cohesive human species. So after the solstice, something significant happens in the planetary grid. Earth jumps the octave. What this means is that Earth will be broadcasting in a new frequency. This is like a big threshold moment. And it won't be like a big blast. It won't be like a overnight, everybody's on the same page type of a thing. It will be a ripple. And that ripple will help entrain the collective to the tone of truth, sovereignty, coherence, love. Think about what that can do for a whole species. So, what will happen is that these systems, the institutions that were kind of based on the old systems of distortion, polarity, etc., those systems will begin to kind of unravel because they won't be able to keep up with the new normal, the new frequency baseline that is being broadcast. And humans will kind of step back from what doesn't feel good anymore And what that allows is that allows for the first time for collective change to happen. And this is, I've said before, Earth is switching to a tone-based grid system. And this is why that's important. Tone bypasses the mind. Tone bypasses the human cognitive belief systems that humans have ingrained in them. Tone goes straight through that and goes right into the nervous system. That's why no matter what your belief systems are, no matter where you are in the world, humans will feel it and begin to entrain to the new baseline of balance and coherence. This is what allows for what Earth can actually become, what Earth was meant to be, which is unity through diversity. It doesn't mean that humans all think the same things, that we all become the same person. It's not like New World Order where everybody thinks and acts the same. That's not what it is. It's that everybody has the same internal compass of truth and integrity. And they feel that. They can't escape it. So they entrain to the tone that's being broadcast as the new baseline hum that underlies everything, because Earth is broadcasting that tone outward, and not just outward on this planet, but outward into the galaxy. Earth rejoins the planetary chorus. Earth officially exits quarantine. And so what this allows for is it allows for new systems to be built, new models to be built of how humans relate to each other. Systems and institutions that work for humans, not against them, because they're not calibrated towards extraction, towards profit, towards domination, towards distortion. They're calibrated towards truth, integrity, and are able to be built around actually, people stop lying to themselves and seeing through the lies that people tell each other every day. It reminds me a little bit of like when I was a kid, we watched commercials all the time. We kind of had to because couldn't stream anything. You had to sit through the commercial breaks, right? And commercials in themselves are designed to kind of bypass truth and make you feel like you need whatever it is they're selling. Like that's why people at big advertising firms get paid a lot of money, because it's extraction based. And that's what the grid's been enforcing. So it's easy, right? And I see my kids will be watching something on YouTube or whatever, and then a commercial will come on because I'm not paying for ad free. Come on. So then, and then I see them, it's like their little brains are like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I need that thing. And I have to be like, hey, hold on. They said all those things about how amazing this thing was. It could be about insurance or something, and they don't even know what insurance is, but the commercial hooked them because I had a funny talking ostrich or something. And so I'm like, well, I have to talk them through it. Like, they're saying that because they want your money. So they're trying to make this thing look cool, and it's like, I see the gears turning in their heads, right? Humans won't be able to be deceived like that in the same way, because truth will feel obvious. People will be able to see through the lies easier. And even if they don't necessarily see through them, the lies won't hook you in the same way. Won't feel like, oh my God, I need that, right? So that's just one example, but you can kind of apply that to many different aspects of life where things kind of hook you to get a emotional response out of you, and it kind of bypasses your own truth. You can apply that to relationships too. For example, someone, let's just use an example. If a narcissist tries to love bomb you, you might be able to actually see through that. And because it's not about logic, you don't have to know what narcissistic abuse looks like. With tone, you feel it. You feel if somebody is off and not being sincere. That's like a real world example of what it feels like to be able to entrain to truth versus distortion. And you may be wondering too, how does this impact Earth's trajectory? as far as technology goes, as far as things like the planetary crises that are unfolding, whether that be humanitarian or environmental. Do not underestimate how this baseline change in the grid will impact all of these systems. One sector is technology. My understanding, I don't know, I've heard tens, I've heard hundreds of thousands of crystalline beings who are incarnated here. Many of us hold these original blueprints for Crystal Earth, which means being able to design and create technologies that work with Earth, with nature, instead of against them. A lot of this is crystalline based technology, whether that be working with water systems, purification, with transportation. A lot of the technologies on Earth are currently being used because of the whole extraction distortion in the old grid. It's about what's profitable. But with that no longer being enforced across the grid, what happens is it allows the space for new technology to emerge. That's technology that's already being employed on other planets. It's not like a big secret. Humans tend to kind of like base what's possible based off of what we've already seen here. But there's technology that either was employed during ancient Earth times when humans were more working with nature and with other star intelligences and star nations, when we were sharing technologies and things like that, those become able to be reemployed again because the new grid is active, it's not broken, it's not fractured. So these technologies begin to be viable because we're working off of a healed, healthy, functioning energy system on the planet, a crystalline energy system. So this allows for clean technology and innovation to happen. And none of that would have been possible before because under the old grid, it was still risky to even if you did have an idea for an invention for clean technology that doesn't have an environmental impact, you were at risk for being silenced because it would have challenged the institutions that are already in place that are already benefiting off of the technology that is killing our planet slowly. And this isn't a secret. For example, my ex-husband, he had a friend from high school who I'm like, are the facts right on here? This is just what everybody said. And this was the story that was told, the legend of this kid, I guess, where apparently his dad invented the first electric car or something before electric cars were a thing. Or maybe it's just like a prototype for it. I don't really know all the facts. It's a good analogy, regardless. Maybe he created a patent. I don't know. He was bought off by the oil companies and he became a millionaire so that car couldn't be built, right? So these are the types of things that will be collapsing. The institutions are collapsing so that new earth-centered, human-centered systems can be built. Because the whole goal and what we're moving towards, which was what was achieved in other planetary cycles, which is humans living in harmony with each other and with nature, with the planet, with Earth, and not just living in survival. One of the other, I guess, tones that will be broadcast after the solstice will be joy and beauty. Humans will be able to entrain to joy, to beauty, to delight. If we're moving out of survival coding, we have to replace it with something. So we replace it with the blueprint that was originally intended for Earth, which is love, beauty, joy, delight. So all of these things together create a cohesive broadcast from the new planetary operating system, the new logic that the grid will be enforcing, which will be broadcast fully starting on the solstice. So to kind of summarize all of that, we had to dismantle the old grid and the old overlays and the old encoding. That was part of the override mission that I was a part of in that whole project, which was a big one. And now this allows Earth to not just go back in time, but to go forward into the new octave and become what she was originally designed to be, and the human species was originally designed to embody. I hope you learned something today. Feel free to go to my website, monetnoctaris.com, to see what I'm currently offering. If you found this interesting, subscribe to my YouTube channel if you're watching this on YouTube, or go ahead and subscribe to my podcast. If you're listening on like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, so that you can make sure that as season 2 begins to come out, that you are in the loop. All right. I know that was a lot of information. That's all I got, folks. Much love.